Hello, I'm Paul Peterson. Hearing loss reduces a person's ability to communicate easily. Untreated hearing loss deprives not only seniors of easy exchange of feelings, ideas, and other information, but also their family, friends, and caregivers. Seniors with hearing loss often experienced increased feelings of isolation, depression, loneliness, anger, fear, frustration, and disappointment as a direct consequence of those feelings. Hearing loss may also negatively impact the senior's physical health. Have You Heard is the title of today's program. Stay tuned for Aging in L.A. Research suggests that 1 in every 10 Americans has hearing loss, and that translates into about 28 million people. 1 in 3 over the age of 65 has hearing loss. And because the prevalence of hearing loss increases with age, as baby boomers get older, estimates of those with hearing impairment are expected to double the numbers currently reported. Among seniors, hearing loss is the 3rd most prevalent but treatable disabling condition behind arthritis and hypertension. The House Ear Clinic, located in downtown Los Angeles, is affiliated with the University of Southern California School of Medicine and provides instruction in otology to the otolaryngology residents at the USC LA County Medical Center. The physicians of the House Ear Clinic are committed to the complete care of its patients, from hearing evaluation to hearing aid fitting, necessary surgical procedures, and regular checkups. Our guest today is John House, MD, president of the House Ear Clinic and clinical professor of otolaryngology at the University of Southern California School of Medicine. Welcome to Dr. House. Thank you so much for joining us. This is honestly an honor for us that you're here, Doctor. Our focus is always on the particular conditions relating to seniors. Have you seen a change in your practice and in the research that you're doing at the House Institute as our population continues to age?
Well, certainly it's true that 1 in 3 persons over the age of 60 have hearing loss. Mm-hmm. And of course what we're seeing is the aging population. So we're seeing more and more people who are very healthy, mm-hmm. well into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and in many cases 90s. Mm-hmm. And one of the problems that we see, of course, which is the frustration of having hearing loss. So we are seeing an increased number of patients with hearing loss just due to the aging factor. We also have the other factor of the noise-induced hearing loss and the baby boomers and the rock concerts.
The rock and roll concerts, of course.
So we've got a double whammy there with the younger baby boomers also developing hearing loss earlier.
Well, if we could, let me start sort of at the beginning. Profound hearing loss has been known for a long time, occurring in young people. That's one feature of this. But as a population grows older, people sort of have hearing loss sneak up on them. It's like one day they suddenly go, I can't distinguish words anymore.
Well, we also see, of course, the denial factor.
Yes.
You know, Paul, one of the things that I see frequently is I'll say to a patient, and what brings you in to see me today? And he says, my wife. Or in some cases, my husband. But yes. Basically, it's many times it's the relative who actually begins to notice that the person is not hearing and not understanding and maybe responding inappropriately.
Right. What little signs and portends? Or what did that person just say on the movie screen? Or finishing sentences? Or,
exactly.
Honey, didn't you hear that siren?
and as has been mentioned, of course, is the withdrawal, withdrawing from going out because you just don't want to go to a noisy social function because it's much more difficult to understand in those situations if you have a fairly mild degree of hearing loss.
Well, beyond the process of aging, there are any number of factors that can impair your hearing, correct? I mean, there could be an infection. What other kinds of things can happen to us in the course of our life?
Well, if we look at the ear, we realize that the ear is a very complicated organ.
Right, and thank you for bringing this model because this is very helpful.
Well, and it would probably be helpful just to kind of explain briefly that how sound will come through the ear canal. And of course, anything that blocks the ear canal can cause a hearing loss, and sometimes we see that with wax.
Right.
People. And by the way, we do not recommend using cotton swabs to clean the ear. People get in there and they push the wax in, which actually creates more of a problem.
So what's the alternative? Is that warm medication?
You can use the wax removal kits at the drugstore, or if there's any question, see an ear, nose, and throat or otolaryngology physician.
Yeah, thank goodness you taught me this word.
But the sound then strikes the eardrum. The eardrum is very, very thin membrane, which responds to very minute changes in pressure. That causes the little ear bones of the area we call the middle ear to vibrate, and what that does is transmit the sound to the inner ear. So if there's infection, for example, or damage to the little ear bones, that will also cause a hearing loss.
I see.
Now, these types of hearing loss out here are correctable through surgery or, in some cases, medicine. And then the other area is what we call the inner ear, and this is the cochlea, which is filled with fluid.
Looks like a seashell.
It looks like a little snail shell or seashell. And the little bone here called the stapes, which is the smallest bone in the body, causes the sound waves to travel up through the cochlea and stimulate 15,000 delicate little nerve endings. And then that causes the sound to be transmitted then along the hearing nerve to the brain. And when we talk about age-related hearing loss or noise-induced hearing loss, it's typically due to deterioration of these little hair cells or nerve endings within the inner ear.
Would they become less sensitive?
Well, they disappear.
They are
They deteriorate and they die. And so that's one of the things that we will see. Now, part of our research at the House Ear Institute is learning and being able now to get the little nerve endings to regenerate. So that's one of our major research areas is the regeneration of these little hair cells.
Be darned. This is an evolutionary miracle for sure. And seeing how this, well, first its appearance is very convoluted, and yet this is across all species on our planet. Hearing is a critical element in survival.
Paul, you mentioned one factor I would have mentioned. Remember I said we were working on hair cell regeneration?
Yes.
Many animals can regenerate their hair cells.
Really?
If we destroy the hair cells of a chicken, within 2 weeks they regrow.
No, that's remarkable.
Yeah, but humans, vertebrates, mammals, are not able to regenerate their hair cells. We're doing it now in some animals on a very primitive basis, but we have learned through looking at the molecular makeup of the inner ear, looking at the molecules and atoms and proteins, to be able to figure out how we can change the code and allow the regeneration of those little nerve endings.
I love your use of the word we. The fact is the House Institute is an enormous undertaking. I was astonished. Now, what year were you founded?
Well, it was founded by gifts to my father in 1946 from grateful patients.
Wow.
And started very modestly, and now we have 180 employees just doing research and education. We have a $22 million annual budget.
And all of this research across the country is really kind of connected. You were mentioning to me that you have actually discovered the gene that's causing hearing loss in seniors?
That's right. One of my associates, Dr. Friedman, has put together a consortium which actually includes European scientists and our scientists and some companies that are in gene identification, and we've been able to now cone down on the gene or genes that are responsible for age-related hearing loss.
All right, so here's one of your research assistants here, and this staff, they must come to work with a certain passion because you're in the miracle business.
Well, it's fantastic, and research, of course, it does not have the rewards that, for instance, a surgeon has, where I can go in and repair a broken part, so to speak.
Yes.
A researcher works months and years on projects and fortunately sees at the end of that tunnel something that's now applied to a patient. And that's what we try to do at the House Ear Institute and the House Clinic.
Now, you told me something that honestly alarmed me, that there is a rather commonly used drug, Vicodin, which has now been implicated in hearing loss?
Yeah, we first discovered this actually several years ago. We began to see patients who were abusing a Vicodin or the same components, which is acetaminophen and hydrocodone. And many people would start to take it as a painkiller for a back problem or whatever, and then begin to increase their dose.
Yes, well, that's the road.
Right, or people were taking it for the thrill of it because it was sort of a party drug in Hollywood. And we're talking about people who are taking anywhere from 20 to 100 per day. I'm talking about a major dose. I'm not talking about the person that takes takes it as their doctor
the
recommends.
prescribed dose. Yeah.
And these people then will develop a rapidly progressive total hearing loss. They lose all of their hearing. Fortunately, those patients are very good candidates for the cochlear implant.
Is that because of their relative youth?
Yeah, well, no, not necessarily. Age is not a factor. It's the relative short duration of their hearing loss, because we're able to identify it right away and then immediately put the cochlear implant in.
So the duration of your hearing loss plays a role in the possible rehabilitation?
With the success of the cochlear implant, people who have been deaf for many years do not make as good a candidate as someone who just recently lost their hearing.
Well, I know one of the men who represents me in Washington, D.C., Mark Rue, has been blind since birth, and he tells me over and over that he would rather be blind than be deaf, that it has such an impact on life.
Well, Helen Keller said the same thing.
Well, there we are.
And the reason for that is that you and I are sitting here communicating. I can close my eyes and we can continue to communicate. I can be blind, so to speak. On the other hand, if you were deaf, and I can, and then you cannot, you have no idea. And also, hearing is 360 degrees. It's all around us. It's our entire environment. Whereas we see what we see, we don't see what happens behind us. So,
well, even the airlines figured that out. You can watch the movie, but you got to pay to get the sound.
There you go. The sound is very important, and that's one of the frustrations that people have, of course, when they begin to lose their hearing, is they begin to lose contact with the world.
But hearing is not just specific to one thing. It really touches many aspects of our life. You were mentioning to me balance. This little area here.
This part of the ear here is responsible in part for our balance, and this is how we maintain our balance, is by having the fluids within the inner ear react to movements, transmit that information along the balance nerve to the brain, where the brain then is able to make adjustments. So the ear is a very important structure.
Right. When, of course, with seniors, falling is almost always a calamity, because it's the broken hip that leads to institutionalization, and et cetera, et cetera.
And that's one of the major things that we see in our clinic, actually, is that about a third of the patients coming to the house clinic have issues with either vertigo, spinning vertigo, balance issues, or dizziness.
Right. Now, help is available, and you've brought some of the hearing aids that are in use today. And could you take a minute to show them to us? Because I grew up with Grandpa Burr, who had this enormous thing on his ear and a pack that was hung on a rope around his neck.
Well, the first hearing aids were massive, partly because of the battery technology, and then also the electronics. The first electronic hearing aids were invented in about 1900. Since then, of course, they've made tremendous strides. I think most people would recognize this as being a type of hearing aid that goes behind the ear with the tubing going into the ear and the earpiece in the ear. And this is a very good hearing aid for someone with more of a severe loss. And then we also then have the smaller hearing aids that go strictly into the ear. And then these even get smaller to the point where, actually, I don't have one here, but this hearing aid, for example, goes in the ear also. And then we have some that go deep in the ear, which some people like because they don't really show cosmetically, but they have limitations. More recently, and this is what I'm excited about, because this is a hearing aid that has really come along in the last year or two, and what it is called open fit, because the part that goes into the ear doesn't block the ear. So it allows the normal lower pitch sounds to go through normally, and the high frequency sound then goes down this very, very narrow tube. And you can see how small these are. In fact, they're even coming out smaller than that. You can compare it to the other one you see, and there really is quite a difference now.
Yeah, it's remarkable. My mother, who is 85, has hearing aids for both ears. And you know, as age takes away function, she loses the darn things, you know, or waits for me to show up to change the batteries, which are, it can be a tedious project.
Well, we also see it where the dog gets the hearing aid too.
Oh, that as well. It's time for a short break. When we come back, we will continue our discussion with Dr. John House about hearing treatment for senior citizens. We'll be right back. You stay tuned.
I have cash for 7 to 9 days. I also have a copy of my passport, birth certificate, and insurance papers.
Hi, it's me. I have water and food.
Don't forget, we'll need a first aid kit and my prescription medicine.
Got your message. I have clothes in the flashlight pack. I'll bring batteries and some tools, too.
We'll bring the radio.
A disaster can happen anytime. Are you prepared? At your next family gathering, build your emergency kit. Find the 10 essential items and more at labt.org. Just be ready. Prepare together.
Before approaching an intersection, so that's why two wrong turns don't make a right turn. Now let's learn about tailgating.
Hey, that's how I got my ticket.
You got a ticket for tailgating? That's not good.
That can be really annoying.
Doesn't get you there any faster.
It leaves you no distance to brake.
Which makes it easier to get into a crash.
And it also may increase your insurance premium.
And I hate tailgaters.
Tailgating causes crashes. Back off. Watch the road.
Welcome back to Aging in LA. The title of our program today is Have You Heard? And our special guest, and I mean really special, is Dr. John House, president of the world-renowned House Ear Clinic. Thank you again, doctor, for joining us. Now, I want to brag on you a little bit. President Reagan was your patient, correct?
Yes, he was. I saw him during his first term. He came to see me because he was having, obviously, some problems. But it's interesting, by the way, his hearing loss in one ear was due to an fellow actor, firing a gun close to his ear in the 1940s.
Yeah.
And that's what knocked down his hearing in his left ear. And so when I was seeing him, discussing the problems with him, I said, Mr. President, I think you need a hearing aid. Now, mind you, he's up for re-election. Age is an issue.
Of course.
And, many people say, well, I'm just, don't want to look old, so I don't want to wear a hearing aid. The president said, do you think it'll help, doctor? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, fine, let's do it. And, it took 2 weeks for the press to find it. When they did, hearing aid sales went up 75%.
Well, the value of a person who does not have that kind of strangely placed ego.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the genuine article, a great hero of mine. But now, did Nancy say, Ronnie, I can't hear you, or you're not listening anymore?
Actually, she did not.
Good.
But, and she was very delightful. She is a very delightful person.
Yes.
And she was very gracious. And she did appreciate the hearing aids because it really did help. I mean, it helped him both in his meetings and it helped him at home and in social situations.
Yeah. Well, I want the president to be able to hear his advisors, that's for sure. Now, one of the things that is so encouraging in talking to you is that you're involved in actually helping people, taking whether it's corrective surgery or this incredible device, this cochlear implant. And I'm not sure I understand what that does.
And I think it's important that people do understand when we talk about the cochlear implant, first of all, it's a device.
Well, we have some footage of you here working on it.
Yeah,
exactly.
This is an example of doing this type of surgery where we actually will go into the ear and we will place tiny electrodes into the inner ear, into the cochlea. And what those electrodes do is they stimulate the nerve electrically. And these are patients who have lost those little hair cells, so they're no longer able to convert vibration to an electrical impulse. So the cochlear implant takes over that.
I see.
And it was developed at the House Ear Institute by my uncle, William House. He started in about the 1960s, and it has progressed from a very primitive device to an extremely sophisticated device that is restoring hearing to the deaf, not only the aging, but to infants.
I would have loved to have been around your house with all the houses at dinner time. Was this the table talk? Was this the research and things that I've witnessed today?
I think the excitement of coming home and finding out that a patient has received the cochlear implant and they're now hearing was something that was very inspirational, of course, to me as a young person and as a person who wanted to do something similar.
Well, we have someone special we'd like everyone to meet. Henry McIntyre is 78 years old and still works, as an auditor at the Los Angeles Department of Aging. He experienced hearing loss as a young teen and shares his experiences and treatment with us.
My experience with the hearing loss goes back to when I was living in New York City, in the Bronx. And I was 13 at the time. And that was in 1943, just before Christmas. And I became very sick. And what happened, I was able to get home somehow. I sort of staggered home, and the doctor, Dr. Gordon, came. They did house calls at that time. So he came and examined me and said, oh, it was apparently meningitis, streptococcus meningitis. So they called an ambulance, and I was taken to Willard Parker Hospital in New York City for contagious diseases. And it was pretty serious then what I came down with, and they gave me the last rites. But I survived the meningitis, and in the hospital, they determined that I did have a hearing loss. And it turned out to be a hearing loss in both ears. Up to that time, I had normal hearing. On my own, I went to the school for the deaf. I knew where it was, and I went there and told them to be admitted. And they said, well, we'll let you talk to one of our teachers. So they did. Her name was Helen Herrick, and she was very understanding, and she said, Henry, you don't need to go here to the deaf school. She said, what you apparently need is a hearing aid. So from there, we were told, my family was told about this New York League for the Hard of Hearing. And so I went there. It was a nonprofit organization, and they gave me the chance to test different hearing aids without having to go to different hearing aid dealers. So I chose one, and then I went to the particular dealer, and then I was fitted with the hearing aid for the first time. And I do remember when I was home with the hearing aid for the first time, my mother opened a paper bag. It seemed so loud. Ooh, I had to get used to that. But the New York League for the Hard of Hearing was not finished with me. They pointed out they had speech reading classes, and they had practice of speech classes, and also they felt I should go for what was called then oral rehabilitation. So I went to this Mary Wood Whitehurst that conducted the oral rehabilitation, and what she taught me was to utilize what I would see on the person's face. She included the lip reading, and combine that with what I heard. So we went through different lessons that way, and that was very helpful. And since then, that's what I do. I read lips as well as utilize whatever the hearing instrument that I have, what they give me. So the combination is very helpful that way. It's hard for people to realize at times that I may have this so-called profound hearing loss. Before I obtained the next instrument later on, I was at a rock concert. Remember, I took the hearing aid out. I was curious to see how much I would hear. It was so loud, I heard absolutely nothing. And I told one fellow that was there at the concert, and he said I was lucky. He said he wished he could turn off all that noise just by flipping a switch, see, like I could. So it's how you look at things. In 1957, after a whirlwind courtship, I got married, and my wife and I, we moved to California. And I wound up working at UCLA. And I remember my hearing, and there was a problem with my hearing. It sort of, what little was there sort of was nosediving, going down worse. So I found out there was this house ear clinic in Los Angeles by 3rd and Alvarado across from St. Vincent's Hospital. So I started going there, and that was in the early 60s. And Dr. William House performed surgery because fluid was building up in this ear. And so he operated and removed all that excess fluid. And so he saved what little hearing there was in this ear.
Henry recently had cochlear implant that can help most severely and profoundly deaf people to hear. He talks about the results.
One of my assistant listening devices was my wife. And so I'd say, what is this I'm hearing? See, at the house. And She says, well, oh, that's the kettle. So then I started learning what that was. And I had been feeding birds in the backyard for a good while, and I never heard them. So here I suddenly was hearing the different birds, and after a while, I was able to understand the different birds and their sound. Then I also started hearing these insects, the crickets. We had crickets around the place for years, I guess, and I hadn't heard the crickets. And when I'd ask my wife, I said, what's the sound? She had to listen. She was so used to, I guess, the crickets, see? And she said, oh, that's the crickets you're hearing.
You know, Dr. House, that's a quality of life issue. That's what that story is.
It's something we see every day, too, which is so gratifying.
No, it has to be. Now, how do people contact the House Institute, or what do they do to find you and hearing help?
Well, I want to emphasize that anyone who thinks they have a hearing loss should be checked by a hearing specialist. At the House Ear Clinic, of course, we do see patients. The phone number is area code 213-483-9930. That's the clinic.
Right.
Now, the Institute is a not-for-profit research organization, so if they have any questions regarding our research or possibly even supporting the Institute, that's the number to call, would be the Institute itself, which is a different number, 213-483-4431.
Well, and the support of the Institute is, $22 million annual budget is significant.
Yes.
And it's amazing what we can spend money on, and important things go a-begging. I can't let this show end without me saying to you how proud we are that you came and joined us to help explain to people that help is available and that hearing loss does not have to impact your life.
Well, Paul, thank you for having me.
Well, we're out of time for this edition of Aging in L.A. Oh, thanks so much to our guest, Dr. John House of the House Ear Clinic. And, of course, our thanks to Henry McIntyre for sharing his stories with us. And now it's time for Senior Stat Shots. Today we have some information for you on how to communicate with a senior who has a hearing loss. It is important not to assume that he can hear and understand what you are saying if he is wearing a hearing aid. Begin the conversation by getting the senior's attention. Converse in a quiet environment with few visual and auditory distractions. Communicate in a well-lit area and avoid standing in front of bright lights or windows. Make sure your face and mouth are clearly visible. Do not eat, smoke, chew gum, or cover your mouth. Enunciate your words clearly, avoiding exaggerated lip movements or shouting. Maintain eye contact. If you have to turn away from the senior, wait until you reestablish eye contact before continuing your conversation. Use facial expressions and gestures to help clarify your message. Pointing to appropriate objects or using visual aids can also be very helpful. And that's today's Senior Stat Shot. I'm Paul Peterson for the Los Angeles Department of Aging, the people here at City View Channel 35, and all of our guests on Aging in LA. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Dr.